without further delay, we're going to get started, and I'd like to ask both Ms. Wilson and Dr. Bustles if you can take a second. We know about your who you are in the public, but tell us a little about your personal background and how you got here today. Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Aditi Bustles. I am what I like to say, public health nerd by trade. I am about 9 months into being your city councilman at large, and it has been really an honor to work with so many people and get to take on some of our city's toughest challenges. But I always say I love to solve problems. I am married to a Army nurse, previous Army nurse, now is at the ER at Providence, now MUSC. We live in Earlwood, and yesterday was my birthday, so I'm gonna take that liberty and say that I'm here bright and early and want to give a special shout out to my inspiration and the man that just is the reason why I am who I am, and that's my dad, who's in the audience visiting from the DC area. So Papa, thank you for being here.
I'm glad to see Dr. Bustles' dad. Happy belated birthday. I'm Teresa Wilson, the city manager. I've been in this role since 2013, and I've been at the city of Columbia since 2007, so 15 years at the city total. Really enjoy local government. I fell into it. I graduated from the University of South Carolina Honors College and the University of South Carolina School of Law. And so I totally changed careers in a way and fell into local government, but have used my skills every day working to advocate for the city and with all of our wonderful departments and employees. I am a proud mother of a 19-year-old, now University of South Carolina Honors College sophomore. I'm engaged to an Army veteran and local business owner, and I'm very, very much so have been given my foundation by my wonderful parents who just celebrated 50 years of marriage, and 50 years as alumni of Benedict College. And so they had a great homecoming weekend, and I've been teasing everybody that I was, definitely not the center of attention. My mother was. She was Miss Benedict 1972. So we were at the parade on Saturday morning having a good time. But all of that to say that I'm homegrown, love Columbia, went to high school at Irma High School and have made a choice to stay here. And I love this city.
Great. Thank you both. What we're going to do in terms of format today is a little different than past issues forum. We're going to allow some questions for Dr. Bustles and specific to the rapid shelter, and then a break for questions from the audience. And then Ms. Wilson's going to get up and do presentations, kind of the slideshow overview and questions paired with that, and then wrap, total questions at the end. And by the way, coffee's here, so you will not insult me if you want to get some. But with that as background, we'll go ahead and get started with you, Dr. Bustles. If you give us a little high-level overview of the work that went into the opening of the rapid shelter, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So in February, we decided to create a task force to prevent and end homelessness. The mayor asked me to lead that work, particularly because of my experience around public health issues. And I do believe homelessness is a public health issue. When you think about the different facets that go into what makes someone homeless, you think about mental illness, substance use. You're often one decision away from that happening, right? And so really thinking about the complex root causes of a complex problem was especially important. This is the number one thing that we have gotten calls about, sometimes complaints about, sometimes angst about from not only our business owners, but our constituents as well. So I would actually say both on the campaign trail as well as now, this is a top 3 issue. And we hear about it from all corners of the city. So this is not concentrated just in the downtown core. We're hearing about it in Harbison, in the Garner's Ferry area. And this is also a situation that's not unique to Columbia. And I want to be very clear about that. We've seen a national uptick of people experiencing homelessness. And some of that has to, as you can imagine, do with the hardships from the pandemic, both economic and financial and social. And some of it's also just the cost of living and the different challenges that come from that. And so keeping all of that in mind, I was lucky to already have some great relationships with folks that are providing services to those experiencing homelessness. And I really wanted to understand the multiple perspectives that go into understanding this problem. So what ended up happening is that we put together a committee of concerned business owners, citizens, people that just really cared about moving the needle on homelessness. And then we involved the providers in terms of one-on-one conversations. We had, kind of, I like to say key informant interviews, but really had some good in-depth conversations to really understand the scope of the problem and to really make sure that we were able to create achievable outcomes. When you think about homelessness as a whole, right, that's a very daunting issue to try and solve. But when you think about what our specific lane and role can be as a city, it makes it a little bit easier to think about what's possible for the city of Columbia and how can we lead as we have in terms of homeless services to really make a difference, to balance both the safety and economic concerns of our business owners and the social and compassionate side of addressing homelessness. And so we had a outside researcher conduct a study for us. We really wanted to understand the landscape of services in the greater Columbia area. And so he cataloged all of the different services that touch any sort of population that may be experiencing homelessness. And like I said, when you think about the whole population, that includes families, kids, veterans, the list can go on because there's so many different facets of homelessness, even within that field. And so we learned one thing that shouldn't surprise all of you, and that is Columbia is known for providing good services. We have a lot of different options available. Now, when you map that out, it may be even difficult to get there when it comes to when you have a car because they're all over the city or all over the county. A lot of these services are restricted by the funding that they are provided, where they can only serve specific, groups of people or, specific age groups or specific genders. And so it wasn't that we didn't have services, and there, we can always do more, but we felt like people just maybe weren't talking to each other to build a true spectrum of a continuum of care in a way that was serving the needs of our city. And we also learned this term that HUD uses, the unsheltered or the chronically unsheltered population. We found that there were very few, if anyone, working with specifically this hard to reach population. These are the folks that unfortunately may engage in criminal activity, or we often get calls about from constituents. And they're really hard, whether it's for trauma reasons, whether it's for, just general hardships that have led to not wanting to trust the system. And so we worked with CPD to kind of get an idea of how many people that is. And they estimate anywhere from 200 to 250. They're typically the folks that we're seeing the most visibly on the street. And we realized that our focus has to be that. So one thing I want to make clear as we have our conversation today is we're not talking about homelessness big, right? We're talking about specifically this population of the chronically homeless or the chronically unsheltered that are often hard to engage, but really, need the services and need to be able to engage in a way that works for them. And so we continue to work and understand. I am a researcher by trade, so I read a lot of peer-reviewed publications, got to talk with some of our national partners, got to talk with Mayor Wu's team in Boston to understand what they had done. And there's one thing that kept coming back, and that was single occupancy units. So the traditional shelter model where you have many people living in one space often doesn't work for some of our hard to reach populations, again, because of trauma and substance use, mental illness, you name it. Given the high costs of housing, in addition to just the challenges of getting more affordable housing in any city, we know that this would be something very difficult to tackle. And I think City Manager Wilson will talk a little bit more about how we got creative about that. But we knew that we needed to find single occupancy spaces where someone can live with dignity in order to then triage them into various services. Through all of the interviews that I was able to do and to talk with people, I also learned that oftentimes people don't know what services are available, and maybe we need a one-stop shop or a hub where people can meet where our, you know, chronically homeless or chronically unsheltered folks are. And then, you know, put them out to the different services that they need. And so that was really where I felt it was important for us to step up and take a role and take a lead. And then lastly, you know, traditionally, the city hasn't coordinated or really overseen its funding in the sense that it gives out funding to a lot of its great community partners, but there really was no kind of person or go-to in terms of homeless services within the city. And so a model that, you know, the task force learned from a lot of other cities that was working really well, including our neighbors in North Charleston, was this idea of like a homeless coordinator, or I say czar, I know you don't love that word, but somebody who can really be that point of contact that participates in existing systems and infrastructures that are created for providers, really advocates for the needs of the city. Because one thing we've learned, and should be no surprise to you all, is oftentimes Columbia is taking on the burden of the entire state when it comes to a lot of our services. And we need people to be vocal about that. We need really regional and state collaboration to ensure that if we're going to be known for the best services, then people need to support us both financially and in terms of making sure that we have everything we need for our system to work efficiently. And so we had all of these great conversations on the task force. You know, I was able to kind of summarize a lot of that into a memo for my colleagues. We had some really great, I think, in-depth conversations. And I remember City Manager Wilson saying, okay, you've done the work, give it to us and let us take it now and let us bring you back something based on everything that you've, you know, shared with us. And I have to give a shout out to my colleagues because this is really the first time that I've seen a council be so collectively on, you know, on the same page in terms of we have to do something about this. Sometimes it's really hard and there are definitely uncomfortable conversations. The intent is never to, you know, go in with anything with ill intent, but sometimes tough love is required. And I have to say that the entire council, we said, let's do it. We have to do something. We have to do things differently because it's just not working. And so we had, you know, preliminary conversations with Ms. Wilson, and that's how Rapid Shelter Columbia was born. So I'll pass it over to her.
We got a couple.
Oh, more questions. Okay.
We'll pass over to her in a second.
Okay.
If you could summarize when you were talking to the service providers, what their biggest concern was, and maybe the concern different in the last 2 years compared to historically.
Well, I think in general, I touched on some of it. The number one thing I heard was it has gotten more difficult because of the COVID pandemic in terms of just financial hardships that often lead to becoming, you know, chronically homeless. Also, mental health and issues around mental health are at an all-time high. And, you know, I think in general, I also heard there was a little bit of, I'll be honest, a little bit of uneasiness that we took this approach of having maybe our concerned citizens and business owners in the beginning just be the ones at the table to really help us understand what they were experiencing. But then, you know, when we started to have these really great, meaningful, in-depth conversations, in fact, I had a great one with Melanie and her team here at the Richland Library, just talking about their experiences, got to do a tour of transitions, got to meet with my partners at Mercy and have worked with United Way for years. I think they began to really see how this is all kind of playing out. We really, really wanted to address the root cause. And that required us to take a very objective, intentional approach to understand where all of these issues were. And so, you know, I thought that the providers, they came and did these wonderful presentations to the task force, and we gave them some pretty, I think, spicy questions, right? We asked them, one of the things that we learned is that there's not many services after 5 p.m. What do you all think we should do about that? And every single provider that came and talked, they had some really great ideas about, well, this is, you know, what we need to do. We talked about collaboration. There are lots of services available. How can you know, providers better collaborate? And, you know, our providers acknowledge that there is sometimes a very competitive environment for different homeless services, and that there's always room to be better and to do better in terms of talking to each other. And some of it's also, again, the nature of funding, right? South Carolina, we learned in terms of federal HUD funding does not get, I would say, our fair share compared to the population that we serve. When you look at other states like Connecticut, where their formula is much higher. So there's certainly work to be done in that sense, in terms of bringing in some of those other opportunities. But I think the number one thing they said, we're aware of these issues. We understand that this is a very delicate situation that requires balance, and we're here to help.
Great, thank you. Take a quick question from the audience. If anybody's got Dr. Bustle before we start in on Ms. Wilson's presentation. Yes, ma'am.
So the pods, we're boots on the ground. So our organization literally deal with the individuals in the cracks and crevices of Donis Ferry, Lexington, Columbia area. So to our understanding, and me speaking with about 100 unhoused individuals on last Friday, they're under the perception that individuals are being moved from transitions into the pods. So that's what I kind of wanted to get some clarity on to translate to the individuals that we serve out on the street. Because of course we know things are being said, but they're like, well, technically it's not helping us because we're still on the street, but they're moving from one shelter to the next.
So I'll let you add to that, but I would say that that's not true. Transitions is still a resource and partner. They are the ones helping us coordinate the rapid shelter, right? But we will be having our inclement weather center, now known as Rapid Shelter, open, and will stay open in the traditional shelter format. But then we have 50 additional pods, and there's going to be a referral system, right? We want to use the data and the systems that already exist to make sure we get folks into the system and we're able to get them to the services that we need. But you know, I'm not really sure where that is maybe coming from. So
We'll get to that. Let me answer your question. The answer is no, that isn't how it will work. But it would probably, you may better understand it if we go ahead and go through the PowerPoint presentation, and I'll make sure I specifically address that and be very clear about it. I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Bustles for all of her hard work with the Task Force to Prevent and Homelessness. It was a heavy lift, but it was, you know, the good work that elected officials should be doing, and she took it on very robustly, and I want to commend her for doing that. She did a great job of really explaining how we have gotten to where we are. And what I would say as part of her description is that this council has taken a pretty bold move. A bold move from the standpoint of the investment of the dollars. They more than doubled the spend on homeless services that the city of Columbia has traditionally invested. They have invested in human capital as a municipality and as a manager. What I always tell our citizens and our business owners is that we are about the work every day, the people who do the work to make sure the water's clean and the trash is picked up. And now, as Dr. Bustles described, we're moving even more into a different era, probably of how we address homeless services as a city by really focusing, as she said, on the chronically unsheltered, because we are hearing from the business owners, the citizens, particularly those around city center, who feel the impact of these chronically unsheltered on a daily basis. I see many of you in the crowd, our friends who work with us, our partners who experience, you know, behaviors on their doorstep, literally, that we really just can't tolerate as a city, but we also have to balance how to deal with that with a compassionate and dignified approach. And so before, we have always had our traditional congregate shelters, as Dr. Bustles described, and they work well, they're doing their jobs, you know, the very best of their abilities. What hasn't been an option for Chief Holbrook or others who face chronically unsheltered population on a daily basis, maybe exhibiting some behaviors that need to be addressed. It may not be a behavior that requires or should require them being incarcerated, is that they haven't had an immediate place to take these individuals. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this presentation is going to show you our attempt at beginning to provide that immediate place where individuals who are not already at transitions or not at Oliver Gospel or any of the other congregate shelters will be potentially given the opportunity to be assigned to a pallet shelter unit. And it will be done only on a referral basis, only with the work of our homeless services director, and I do like the terms are. I think it just doesn't work well for a job description for a human resources director, so we had to come up with homeless services, director of homeless services, and we're so excited on it. Show you a picture of Kamisha Hepard, who is our homeless services director, been on the job and boots on the ground for not even 2 weeks. It's been a seamless transition because Colonel Craig Curry, who's in the audience, the CEO of Transition, has shared her with us. She was his VP and number 2 person, and she applied for this job and got it. And she was just simply the best choice, and she knows the population intimately. She has also a project manager that we've hired, Ms. Mackin Wall, who is a young superstar. They both have their masters in social work from the University of South Carolina. And Mackin has made it, and it's said to me it is her life's work to work not only as a social worker, but specifically with the homeless population. And she has served us well in this community. We're at Washington Street United Methodist, running their soup cellar and other opportunities she's had to network with all of our providers. So it's just been, sometimes I say the stars aligning for us to find the right people, not only in their professional backgrounds, but who know this population that we're trying to serve. And so let me show you a few photos of where we are, how we started, and where we have landed. Kamisha and Mackin are not here with us this morning, but we hope to have them with you in the future because we're launching today. It was the goal of the council for us to launch on November the 1st, because that had always been the day when the Inclement Weather Center, that's the title as we knew it. We're rebranding that title, but honestly, the operation of Inclement Weather Center is the same. It's simply now the rapid shelter component, that's the overflow. So any individuals, if you're speaking to individuals, ma'am, that are still looking for shelter on a cold night when it's 40 degrees or below, or certain other triggers about inclement weather, they can still be shuttled. It's not, no walk-ups, shuttled to this facility, same setup as it has been. But now in addition to those 2 Butler buildings, you will see how we have deployed the 50+ rapid shelter units, the pallet shelters. So with that, Corey, and let me thank, listen, we can't do what we do without the best team in Columbia. So Corey Williams of IT is here, Ms. Pamela Benjamin, who's the Assistant City Manager of Administration, Ashley Jenkins Wood from my office, who does project management with me, and I see Assistant City Manager Henry Simon, who's on facilities for the City of Columbia and operations, who really can help me talk about this. You might have to jump up here, Henry, as far as how this came about in 2 months' time, literally.
Amazing, 70 days.
Yeah, so we'll show you some pictures. So this is September the 7th when, as Dr. Bustles described to you, the council had kind of come to terms with what could be out the gate, an idea that really literally addresses the chronically unsheltered with a new option. And we went on site and had this press conference to just sort of announce to the community and to our providers who are going to be so integral in the success of this, what the concept is for rapid shelter.
And I just want to add something that this is a short-term solution, and I think that city manager will emphasize this. This is not long-term. This is a temporary solution to then allow our folks to get the services that they need. The task force is always to be a short-term solution focused as well, given the urgency of the issue. So
Absolutely. Again, this was just the site as it's always been, always have been for Inclement Weather Center, but that's just the side of one of the Butler buildings. So this gives you a little bit of a feel for the original site plan as we thought or conceived it to become. On the left side, you see the majority of the units where they would be deployed for the men, and the right side for the women. Those 2 big rectangles again are the the Butler buildings have always been, in place down on Calhoun Street for the Infinite Weather Center. It's just an aerial, as work was beginning to get started with grading of the site. Another view, where this is near our canal, near our water treatment plant. So, there's just a lot of thought that had to go into this. As many of you probably know, we are very fortunate finally with funds from FEMA and the federal government to be finally moving forward with, I don't want to talk about the flood, it gets emotional, but some of the issues that, we've still dealt with since the 2015 flood. The pallet shelter site, again, moving forward as of September 29th. We had electrical meters set, thanks to Dominion. Shout out to them for being so quick and working with us, as they always do. Another aerial at this point, concrete's being laid, sidewalks are being laid. So by now we're at October 11th. We're really starting to see some progress. The units are heated and have air conditioning. So all of that had to be taken into account. We have restroom facilities inside the Butler buildings that have showers as well. We wanted to make sure that, we would have enough bathrooms. So we also invest in portable restrooms and want to make sure at certain times. So certain nights, conceptually, you have to think about this. The nights when it's inclement, we'll have another population on site like they've always been. But the idea is to still keep some separation and stage the times for dinner service for those who will be coming on the inclement weather nights. But we also have to feed our individuals who will be there 24/7 who've been assigned to a pallet shelter unit. So we're trying to, as we're going through this, think about, how is this really going to work? And we have a great team who sorted all of that out. Invested in commercial grade washers and dryers. Turf installation, and quite frankly, it was just going to be better for maintenance for our purposes. It's a nice, clean look. People who know me well, I was probably from a mom who taught for 30 years and a father who was a superintendent of schools for almost 50, that, you gotta set a tone. You gotta set a tone that hopefully will instill in the individuals who will be assigned to these locations some pride. We want to provide a wonderful atmosphere for them with dignity, but there also will be rules and regulations and dignity standards and guidelines that must be followed. This was a big day for us when the pallet shelters arrived on October the 24th. Pallet shelters are based in the northwestern part of the country. So this is a new thing in the South. We do believe, and we've said this as we research, it will be the first in the Southeast to try the concept. And so literally they came in on big 18-wheeler trucks, were deployed, and kudos to our city teams who just embraced this, wanting to establish teams of their own. They got a little competitive with it. We had a public works team and a Parks and Recreation team and engineering and all of these different city departments who formed teams, and the teams had team leads, and literally it was just like an assembly line. They learned, the folks from pallet shelters taught them on day one how to do this, and they did it. And I kept saying, slow down, I want to be able to show everyone how this is done. But I mean, literally in 2 days they had built these units. And there again are our wonderful city teams working. On October the 26th, yeah, big smile that day, we were able to showcase for a lot of our provider partners, the media, give them an opportunity to see the concept, as it was built out. And, that's Tanisha there at the bottom left, really did a great job answering questions about the programming piece, because so this was hard to get it stood up, but I think the even harder part is now the implementation of the programming and working to make sure that every single day we have the right number of service providers from, staged and staggered, but Office of Veterans Affairs or LRADAC or DMH, Prisma Health has already said they want to be on board. So we're really thankful that these partners are going to step up, but we need you all to help remind, I guess, our community partners that, again, the city can't do it alone. There's just no way that any of this works without those providers. The investment that I mentioned has been there. We are creating jobs with this. As Dr. Bustle said, I've been saying it's no longer kind of a middleman approach, although we were so thankful for the United Way's coordination with our various contracts over the years. That is truly the second difference here, is that the city is now going direct with the providers. We are going direct with the contracts with Transitions and the Common and the Salvation Army. I see all our partners in the room to make this happen. And that is just, quite frankly, accountability when you do that. That is Rapid Shelter Columbia, the aerial view as of October the 26th. He's having a little lunch. And we had a wonderful community member who came and grilled hot dogs and hamburgers for our team. He did a great job that day. Close it out. I think we have a photo of, this is just our construction schedule. I kind of talked through that already for you. I talked about how the team leads were developed with the 4 to 5 volunteers per shelter unit. They've been anchored to the ground. I mean, these are, just to be clear, these are very well done units. They are anchored, engineered, safe. They've been used for years and proven. Get to Kamisha and Matkin's photos and contact information. So Kamisha Hepburn, as I described, is our Director of Homeless Services. Matkin Wall is our project manager. We'll have a third staff person she's been hired, starts tomorrow, who will be assisting Kamisha and Matkin, working with our providers to set up, all of the wraparound services. One of the other things that I think has been key to Dr. Bustle's point about after-hour services after 5 is that, and it's been eye-opening for me to get neck deep in this as well. Some of that has also been the capacity to do it. So now we have our Pathways unit through the Columbia Police Department, where Department of Mental Health clinicians are assigned with members of CPD. They will be doing that type of outreach. We really need the Department of Mental Health stabilization unit, which you'll hear me always emphasize that every opportunity I have, because even with all of this, those individuals who have mental health needs and need some stabilization before they're put anywhere need to have somewhere to go as well. And that system has worked in other parts of the state. We want it to work well with the capacity it needs in the Midlands. And so you'll hear our council and me talking with our state partners to push for that. We'll also have more street outreach individuals now funded through this effort, through Transitions, and through the city's team to be working after hours as well. So I'll stop there and, any specific questions.
That's great. We're gonna take questions from the audience in about 10 minutes, plenty of time, if y'all can spare that, but, y'all both talked about the short-term solution and wanted to, see if you could detail some of the long-term plans. I know there's an initiative to raise, apply for some grants, get some private money. I think there was a $9 million talked about in one of your budget meetings, so if y'all could both, detail kind of what the long-term strategy looks like, that'd be great.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that we're looking at. I think we've touched a little bit on the need for services after 5. So it was the legislative committee that met, and I'm a member of that committee along with Mayor Rickaman and Councilman Taylor. And we are asking, and we're going to be going to the State House to work on getting funding for that crisis stabilization unit that we really need in the Midlands area to serve the chronically unsheltered, and that would be a DMH ask, and so working around that. And I touched on this a little bit, but I think, the federal approach is also important. There's a lot of dollars coming down from the administration through some of our community development dollars, as well as some of our housing and urban development or HUD funding. Much of that funding goes to the Midlands Area Coalition on Homelessness. So, we'll be playing, I think, a more active role now that we have staff coordinating these services on that. But, I think council is also very interested in looking at what is considered the Midlands. What we learned was that the Midlands, currently defined by that, is from Rock Hill to Allendale. So much of our services that are funded by HUD have to serve all of those counties. And when you think about, kind of the pressure that's often placed on the city, and I'm very proud that we're leading our way in finding innovative solutions, but we have limited funds. We have limited capacity to handle these things. But if we are taking on, the burden of helping people across the region, then we need our regional partners to step up. We've also talked about the 9 million that you're referring to, and that's really to take a look at expanding some of our shelter options, kind of consolidating. As I mentioned to you all, one of our staff members actually mapped out where all of our major services are in the city and in the county, and not surprisingly, they're kind of all over the place. Sometimes it takes over 35 minutes to get from one service to the other, and that's by car. So imagine if you were using public transportation or a bike. And so we'd like to use that seed funding to address some of these concerns that I just detailed, but then also to take a look at where we could be shifting or physically moving services to make it a little bit easier for folks to be able to navigate the different services that are available.
I would just echo what Dr. Bustles said as far as any, advocating for funding through the state. I think she's pretty much touched on that very well. The city center has changed, and I think that we all in this room probably are happy about some of the changes we've seen. A best practice would tell us, and look at other cities, that the more you advocate a city center, a lot of our more challenging individuals probably organically go away anyway. And, with the revitalization of Phillips Park, which is the growth of Main Street and the perimeter, it just has become something that has to be addressed. Those challenging individuals, we've got to find a way to do it, and do it while balancing compassion and trauma-informed care. What I would also suggest is that we need all of the voices to be pulling in the same direction about things like that. So, feeding and ministering in the park while we're gonna make sure we are doing everything in a legal and constitutionally right way. To do those things and not clean up after oneself, or provide the opportunities if you're going to provide a service and not clean up, is no longer palatable for the city or our partners with City Center Partnership to do that on our own every day. And what I think could work and should be the case is that we have order to that It's not to say that you cannot participate, you cannot be permitted to provide opportunities for individuals in need. We have to have order in order to do that and do it in a way that it does not infringe upon everybody's right to a quality of life in the city of Columbia. And so I think some of those things also came up during the task force, which was hard conversations, but needed conversations. And I think those will be some of the additional things that our director will help work with me and council to figure out how we balance all of these. You know, Columbia is such a compassionate community, and we have lots of opportunities for our unsheltered individuals to be served, but there has to be order to do that so that everyone, even young mothers and families who are taking their children to a park, can enjoy it as well. So that's another factor that's come up. And then I wanted to make sure I was clear about the assignment of the rapid shelter units as the young lady asked about earlier. So Kamisha Hepburn, the director, and a working group of individuals that are the providers that already know these 200 to 250, as we've identified, chronically unsheltered. They know who these individuals are. And so it's a referral on a referral basis to them to make these assignments. As of yesterday, they have 6 to 10 individuals that they've already targeted, and I anticipate we'll have 6 today being assigned to pallet shelter units. And so they're doing that very methodically, with some specificity about meeting these individuals where they are so that they will be successful. So it's really the opposite. It's not that anyone from transitions will be moved from transitions to a rapid shelter unit. If anything, it might be the opposite, because transitions has tiers and layers of services for individuals that move up to more transitional housing. So we would hope that we'll use Colonel Curry and his team, as well as Housing First and others to help us identify places for these individuals who may be in a rapid shelter unit to then move out, hopefully within 90 days.
Myself personally, as a smaller organization, I have hands-on with a lot of these individuals for the past 5 years. How would you recommend me personally, our organization personally, to advise individuals who are unsheltered, that are facing challenges? We deal with the drug addicts, the mental illness. What would you suggest I relate to these individuals, how to get help? I want to be on the same accord with you guys. So whatever I can translate from my end to this group of individuals in service, I want to make sure it's correct information. So if I see someone with potential who's working, but I know they're sleeping in the park or Memorial Park in the alley, what do you suggest, or how do I refer them to the next level of help?
You would refer them to Kamisha Hepburn, and that I wanted to make sure her email address was up, because she's going to be that conduit for that working group to identify who will get assigned to a unit. So she needs to establish that relationship with you, and have it happen that way. But it doesn't need to be that the individuals are being referred to, all these different places. I think if you're working with someone and you know that they could be a good candidate, we need to know that through her.
And it might also be that through that process, there may be another organization that's a better fit, right? So we're also trying to keep in mind, again, the folks that have been on the ground and doing this work and offer services that folks just may not know that they're eligible for. And so we're hoping that through that triage process or referral process, we can help get folks to the right place. Even if it's not the rapid shelter, maybe there's another housing opportunity that would work for them.
Because we're not servicing families, for example, or children. And so we're trying to keep all of those communications open with our other providers who do serve individuals that would not be served at rapid shelters.
All right, I see a lot of hands going up, so I'm gonna go to the rest of my questions. If you wouldn't mind, when I think if you could stand up and clearly speak out loud so everybody can hear you and your questions. So I'll go with Beverly.
Can you talk a little bit about the 9 million funding that y'all are speaking of and how that affects the nonprofits who are also getting funding maybe from the federal government and private sectors, how that's going to be combined so that maybe the silos of budgeting can all kind of come together to make a bigger impact?
So the 9 million it's great to hear that people are paying attention to our committee meetings. It was it's a legislative priority. It's a wish list for us. And this would be coming from the state. So this would not compete with any of the existing HUD funding that is already allocated to existing providers. This is simply us thinking long-term, and we don't yet know all the details because we'd like to see how our short-term rapid shelter housing works out to really identify some of those gaps. But that could, again, be used for a lot of different things. The city has always partnered with local entities and organizations that understand the communities that they serve. You know, that 9 million may be used for some mini grants or opportunities there. It could be used to create a new location if we identify, you know, similar to Boston, where they were able to take an old hotel and turn it into single occupancy housing and then have wraparound medical services at the bottom. We knew that this was just the start funding that we needed to address some of the various issues I brought up today, whether it's in terms of how many people we're serving, right? It's especially those that may be in the greater Midlands, not just Columbia. It's going to address hopefully some of those issues that we had where services are kind of sprawled all across the region. So it's still very preliminary, but it was really important to us. We're a very proactive council, and we want to make sure that our lobbyists are on the same page with us. So that's what you heard at our legislative committee meeting, is that we will be going to the State House to talk about homelessness. So please do not be surprised, because this is something that's affecting our city.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, front left.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. You use the word temporary in your definition. What does that mean? 5 years, 10 years? Also, you're addressing 20% of the 250 population. What happens to the others? And what other metrics have been developed to count for success or failure in certain areas?
So we'll be looking for Director Heffard and her team to definitely establish goals, metrics, measures of success. Just off the top of my head, if you get, one person, I'm excited, we may have 6 out the gate today off the street in a sheltered location that begins to meet them where they are. It may not mean from day 1 or day 2, they're gonna have a job in Columbia, but if they're having issues with substance abuse, they're not going to be in a safe environment to get those services, hopefully every day, that begins to move them in the right direction. And so you're right to have 50 units. I mean, we had to start somewhere, right? And the rhythm that we need to get in is moving along. We're starting with 6 today. Hopefully we'll get to 50, but it's going to be rotating. So 90 days is sort of what we're targeting for someone to be there to get some of their needs met, and hopefully then move those individuals along so we can bring in the next group and get into that rhythm. We don't have all the answers on day 1 for sure, but that's the concept, is again to move people, meet them where they are, move them along into some type of transitional housing or permanent housing, and move in another group of individuals. The key again though is the partnerships and having those right providers on site to work with them, because this is different. I mean, we've invested in 24/7 security. They will be there, all day, every day. We'll have shuttle services to get them to appointments, eventually a job opportunity, hopefully. But we've got to get in a rhythm with all that.
Yes, ma'am.
So you were saying that 90 days, and and you plan on rotating. So what are you gonna do with the people after the 90 days? Do you have a solution or plan for to obtain affordable housing or some other type of alternative housing?
Right, so the city is not in the business of affordable housing. We're a conduit for developers who want to build affordable housing. We've gotten into gap financing, we've gotten into some of the HUD funds being used for these purposes, as Dr. Bustles mentioned, but the city cannot do it all. So we are here saying, hey, we are trying to capture this group of people who need the help, and quite frankly, the economy is such that someone, probably the individuals we're talking about, it's gonna take a minute for them to be able to afford what even we're saying the definition of affordable housing might be. You know, it's attainable housing really for wherever someone is. What does that mean for them to get to a place of stabilization? And so we need the housing first model to work. We need other like Homeless No More, where they're building units, and all of these providers to hopefully set aside maybe some opportunities for our folks that we're working with so they can be moved to a place of stability. But we don't provide the house, you know, necessarily the housing.
Yeah, I was just wondering your plan after the.
Working really hard with these providers to have something in place, hopefully.
Y'all have time for two more questions. We're at 8:58, so I didn't want to be respectful.
Sure.
Bring on to do. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm Cindy Kellett with the Harbison community, and we had seen a huge uptick in the chronically homeless with some criminal element involved, stealing of credit cards and mailing off the credit cards, those kinds of things happening, not to mention just, property damage. I'm sure everybody's seen that too. So we've spoken with law enforcement about, at what point does someone get arrested? And that really hasn't been happening. And so is that the kind of person that would be referred to Kamisha?
Someone who should be arrested.
Well, if they,
No, ma'am.
well,
It's
that's what
not.
I'm asking. That's really what I'm asking is, at what point do we push law enforcement to say, no, that this person has, we found the credit cards on their person, and if they're not going to jail, what happens?
Right. So
I'm sure
that,
Kamisha doesn't want to deal with that either, so.
Misha wouldn't deal with that.
Okay,
Chief Holbrook would.
okay.
And so Chief Holbrook and his team in the North region where you are located and where I have lived like majority of my life in Northwest Columbia. I understand it and witness exactly what you're talking about. What I think individuals and business owners and residents have to understand is law enforcement has to be able to make a case. They have to see and identify a charge that they can make. And I'm not going to speak for them, but I will tell you that they are very aware of the uptick in North region and Northwest Columbia. And we can sit down and have specific conversations about specific individuals or specific instances that you're talking about to help you maybe understand why an arrest wasn't made. I can't speak to that because I don't know all the circumstances.
Right.
But I can commit to you that I will relay I don't need to relay, they know that's an
Yes,
issue
they
out there, but
I just didn't know where that line is between, we've talked to law enforcement,
Yeah.
nothing can be done, so then what?
right.
At what point?
Right. Well, I think too, what the chief and I have talked about is, and we're gonna try this and see how it works. The difference here maybe has been your behavior, individual A, can either change and we can refer you as a possible candidate for a pallet shelter, or you can go to Unit J, is what Chief Holbrook calls it, which is Unit Jail, right?
Got it.
Before, we haven't had these, non-congregate opportunities to even suggest an individual who, like you said, maybe it is, if they're gonna change their behavior. If they're clearly involved in criminal behavior, then they need to go to unit check.
Thank you, I just wanted to.
Thank you. You had a question earlier? Go ahead. Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. What happens to folks who, within the 250, but, of course, there's more than 250 individuals. What happens to those individuals who don't want to go to be referred or don't want to go to pods? What happens to them? They'll probably be out doing urban camping out in different areas. What happens to those individuals? What's the plan?
Well, I don't necessarily have a plan for someone. You can't force anyone to do anything, right? So what we're hoping for is.
Will the police be out, arresting or rounding up or destroying urban camping, et cetera, as more and more people get evicted, et cetera?
Well, we're never gonna force anyone to do anything that they don't want to do, at their will. We can only make firm suggestions and try to maybe demonstrate what this opportunity, it's new, so people may not have a concept yet, but I'm hoping that they will and they'll be receptive to it. It's just one tool in the toolbox.
Okay. Second question, what happens to folks who do not get any kind of housing after 90 days and they've already been through the pods? What then?
So Director Hepburn and I talked about this. If there's someone who's really making progress and we've hit 90 days, then there's gonna have to be some judgment calls made about, do they stay a little bit longer? Do we keep working with them? But the goal is for permanent housing or transitional housing.
And then last but not least, because of all the tremendous amount of abandoned housing all throughout the Columbia area, all the, Brown areas, all the abandoned malls, et cetera, why was so much money put into these pods and pallets and not into an abandoned house that already exists or housing area, to bring in, more individuals or, look at all the abandoned buildings that already exist?
Well, the city doesn't own those, and we have control over this property. It's the city's property. It's zoned the way we need it to be zoned for this purpose. It's, in a location we can make sure it's secure and no walk-ups. The process of going through developing parcels we don't own, funding, the purchase of those type parcels is probably more a part of the long-term discussion that Dr. Bustles touched upon, and really looking at our partners again through the MOC, even how the MOC is situated right now. Is it the right model? Because consortiums of care like that across the country don't necessarily have to be so broad and wide from a geographic area location. So I think those are some of the discussions we need to see if there's some streamlining that needs to occur so that maybe funding can be utilized even better for the Midlands area. To maybe tackle what you're saying is a great idea to look at repurposing some of these old hotels and that sort of thing.
Great question. Yes, sir. You had your hand up earlier. It'll be the last question for the day.
Hey, you guys, I just want to first of all, thank you so much for what you're doing. We represent the Middle Church, and we've been meeting with the homeless down at Finley Park for 2 years. And I love what you're doing. And I will say at the same time, you're not the solution. You're a start. You're kind of like a seed project. But I would ask you, and we spoke about this before, please have a campaign to reach out to people and say it's going to take people loving people. I mean, 2 years ago, if you said I was going to be loving on the homeless, I'd say no way, right? It's not who I want to hang out with. But I've got to know them. And like you said, all of us could be one decision away from being out there. and they're scared, they can be scary, but then you hug on them and you love them, you find out they're just like they're good, they're just deceived, okay? So we've got to get people out of the church and out into the community loving on people. And then, but y'all are doing a great thing. It's a start, right? We've got more people in one area where we can go love on them. But we've got to, I just beg you somehow start a campaign to call people. You will be blessed if you bless others, the lesser of these. So thank you for what you're doing. We're here to help. That's all we want to do is help lift people up. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you, appreciate it.
What a great thing. Yeah.
Thank y'all both for your time. Everybody, have one more round of applause for these.